Have you dreamt of starting a side hustle that can grow to be your main hustle, which you can then leverage to build a multi-million-dollar business? Well, today's guest has done just that and is going to share exactly how you can do the same. Today's guest is known in many circles as Robuilt after his widely successful YouTube channel, but this is just a small sliver of Rob Abasolo's portfolio, which now includes over 40 doors, most of which he operates as short-term rentals, 3 online programs where he helps students acquire and operate short-term rentals. On top of that, he runs HostCon, the #1 short-term rental conference. He owns strcostseg.com, a cost segregation company, and he's the co-host of Bigger Pockets podcast. Not too shabby. Rob, what did I leave off?
Oh, everything. No, I think that's it. That's pretty comprehensive. Let's see. Anything else? No, I'm about to launch a design company where we design the coolest Airbnbs in the world. That's called Funkit Interiors. But technically, you wouldn't have known about that. I just remembered that when you said that. I was like, oh, that's right. We are launching this. So
That's awesome.
I've got a few irons in the fire, if you will.
I love it. Can we call that exclusive, or is that out there somewhere else yet?
It is technically exclusive. No one knows.
Oh, dang. You got to drop this thing sooner. Yes. I would have it. All right. Well, this is a little ways out. We'll see what happens on there. But that's awesome. It's amazing to have you, Rob, for those who don't know, is a mentor of mine and somebody I followed for a while in this space before I jumped in and got my own short-term rental. And he literally taught me everything that I know. And I have a successful operating property, so I could say, yeah, exactly. Amazing stuff. Rob, you've done what so many people only dream about, which ultimately you could say is quit your job and you pursued your entrepreneurial aspirations.
Hey, that's fine. That's fine.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that always the plan for you?
Definitely not. No. I think I went into advertising and I thought that was going to be like the thing that I did. Unfortunately, I just wasn't really that good at it. You know what I mean? And so I was always like, well, I guess I'm going to work my way up in advertising, but everyone's better at this than me. And so that was always a bit of a, we'll see how this goes, I suppose. But I did always have like the likability factor. So it was one of those things where I wasn't ever going to lose my job because they're always like, well, Rob's got to be part of the team, but he's an okay writer. That's what I did specifically. And, you know, I didn't make a ton of money. I had a lot of debt. And I was just like, man, I got to figure out how to make like more money. And I had heard about this, you know, this website, you can rent your house out to strangers. They'll pay you money every night. And I was like, oh, Airbnb. Okay, I'm going to try this. And yeah, it was kind of bananas after that. But yeah, Airbnb is sort of like the way I was able to leave the 9-to-5 job. And it's kind of crazy that was only like, I don't know, 3 years ago.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I've watched your story and I've seen you literally build layer over layer, which I think is important because some people go look at it now and be like, oh yeah, one of these, you know, overnight stories about somebody doing it. But it has, you know, and even though you say 3 years, you know, it's like, it's still been literally layer after layer. And I would love if you could share a little bit about what that looked like, because I know that, you know, for you and when you started this journey, it literally was, I think you, in essence, house hacking and slowly building yourself from there. So would you mind taking us through just that journey of yours?
Sure. Yeah. So, okay. First and foremost, I started my advertising career in Kansas City and I was making like $40,000. And at that time, it sounded kind of like a lot, right? And my wife, she was nannying and man, we were just, I'm not going to say paycheck to paycheck because that implies like a very certain, you know, like, hey, we were really slumming it. That's not true. Like, but I mean, I don't really know how else to describe it because we didn't have extra money. It was like all the money came in, all the money came out. And then I remember she graduated her graduate program and she was making $45,000. And in you know, together we're making $85,000. And I was like, holy moly, we've made it. But man, it is crazy how fast $85,000 goes really out the door when you have $1,000 in student loan debt, $1,000 mortgage, $1,000 in credit card debt. And then, yeah, like you really just don't have that much left over. And so I was always trying to do whatever it would take to make money. And my coworkers and my friends and my best friends always made fun of me because they were just like, oh, here's Rob trying to get another deal. Because I was always just like looking on Craigslist and like, man, if I buy this and resell it, I could make $50. And then I ended up selling furniture because I wanted to buy this really cool pipe, like coffee table. And I remember thinking like, okay, I'm going to buy this. And I went on Etsy and it was $800. And I was like, $800? That's ridiculous. And I was like, $800? I can make $800? And so I ended up like starting this little furniture side business, and I think I made $8,000 that year. But man, it was meaningful, right? Like it was $800 a month basically, and it meant I could actually, instead of going to Chipotle and getting like a side of rice, I could get the whole meal. And I'm not joking. Like I would literally go to Chipotle, yeah, and I would say, hey, can I have a bowl of rice? And they're like, great, here you go. And they're like, what else do you want? I was like, oh, that is it. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, that is all I can afford, $1.67. So that was kind of like my first like big little side hustle where I was like, all right, this is great. We moved to Los Angeles. It was smart thing to do when you're broke. We're like, hey, why not? Let's move somewhere more expensive. We moved to LA, and I get a salary that's basically double. I'm making like $80K there. And my wife's job is, I think she was making like 70. It's actually, teachers do decent out there, but it's still California. And that was the first time where I was like, okay, it's not too bad. We were making 150, which is good, but like our rent for a 600 square foot home was like $1,800, $1,850, something like that. So, we were kind of living all right there for a second, and it was a 600 square foot apartment. But after like 6 months, I got so frustrated. I was like, I cannot really stand paying someone $1,800 for a 600 square foot apartment and get nothing in return. And so I pitched my wife on buying a house. I was like, I don't care if we're broke. I just don't want to pay a landlord anymore. And she was like, well, can we afford it? And I was like, God, no, but we'll figure it out. And the reason we were able to even afford it is because we had a house in Kansas City that we bought, and it appreciated $40,000 in the 3 years that we owned it. So we had $40K in the bank account with an FHA 3.5% loan. We were able to get into this thing for like $18,500 on a $624,000 house. And that just kind of opened up a can of worms I wasn't really expecting, because my wife, the logical one, was like, well, how are we going to pay for it? And I was like, I don't know. Like, why don't we find something with like a little, bonus room or studio we can rent out? And she was like, great. What about our current apartment? I was like, oh, good question. There's this website. It's called Airbnb, and we can just list this apartment on the website. And she was like, all right, sounds good. And she trusted me. And so we moved out of the apartment that we were living in, and I listed that on Airbnb, and it was making like $1,000 to $2,000 a month. And that was mind blowing. I was like, holy crap, there's so much money here. And then we buy the house. We bought it for $624,000, which was mind blowing at that time because that was 4 times more than our Kansas City house. Our mortgage on that was $4,400, 4 times more our Kansas City house. And but there was a little 279 square foot apartment underneath. And I was just like, I think if we rent this on Airbnb, we can make like $2,000 to $3,000 a month. And so, my wife trusted me. We furnished it, and I was literally like hanging up curtains as the first guest arrived. And it kind of played out almost too good to be true, because we actually were doing $2,000 to $3,000 a month there. The other apartment, we were doing arbitrage. At that time, it was called, I think rental arbitrage was called like Don't Tell the Landlord back in the day. But at that time, it was called, it was arbitrage. And like
in LA,
I was thinking,
called that probably.
Yeah, it is. But don't do that. Do as I say, not as I did. Yeah. But at that time, it was kind of like, all right, making $1,000 to $2,000 there. And when you added it all up, it paid my entire mortgage. And so that was sort of like a really big moment for me, because I've always been a believer in getting out of your mortgage as fast as possible. I didn't ask myself, can I afford this house? I asked myself, how can I afford it? And I was able to afford it through Airbnb, and really house hacking was the catalyst for that. So when people say, how do I get started? I don't have money. I'm like, go house hack, put 3.5% down, rent your room to strangers, to friends. It doesn't matter, but stop paying your mortgage, because the more you can save on that, it's just going to explode your wealth.
And I think that's a super great point, because there's too many people who it's like they'll look for reasons why something won't work instead of trying to figure out how they can make it work. And obviously you're not living with people you're renting your bedrooms out to now. Who knows? Maybe you would if your wife would let you. I don't know. But no, you're beyond that. You've got your family and that. It's but you started there, and I think I've heard you mention before that was like your first level of financial freedom to this degree, because your mortgages now, right, in that scenario. So then,
well, I mean, technically in Kansas City, like we house hacked. We didn't know it was house hacking at the time, but I had a friend that was moving to Kansas, or I convinced him to move to Kansas City. He's like, man, I'm going to be an intern. I'm not going to make that much money. And I'm like, dude, come live with us. I'll charge you $400 for a room, all bills paid, blah, blah, blah. And then he was kind of like, all right, sure, why not? And so he moved in, and I remember when I got my first $400 Venmo, woo, I was so rich. I was like, "Oh,
Chipotle, here you go."
Exactly. My $1,100 mortgage was now $700, and it was truly like a mind blowing thing, right? So I got a taste of it. Then I moved to LA, and I rented out the studio, and then I convinced another friend to move to LA, and I was like, "Move to LA, you can live in a room for $800." And when he would wire me or send me $800, same thing. I was just like, "Holy crap!" Like $800 here. The studio is bringing in $3,000. This Airbnb is bringing in $1,500. Like all I had to pay was my student loans, and that was a huge, huge moment for me.
So today you're still chasing that, what do you call it? That energy that comes from when you get a booking that comes from your Airbnb and you see $800 land in your account. You still get that?
Yeah. I mean, I have a Scottsdale property that was $3.25 million, which, admittedly, that's an expensive one. And I don't know if I'll buy more at that level just because it's a bear to run. But dude, when it rains, it pours over there, and like, $2,000 a night, you get a 5 or a 6 night booking. Whoo, man, $10,000-$12,000. Like it feels good. It's really, really nice. Now, not all profit, but I think, let's see, what is March? We did 44,000 this month on that specific property.
Wow. I saw one in Scottsdale. It had like a golf course in the back. Don't tell me that's the one, right?
No, it's got a pickleball court.
Pickleball court.
Yeah.
Not yet. We'll see when he adds that, because you've been enhancing. I know a lot of your properties is a big focus for you now. But I'm curious, when you then took that leap, from in essence getting your mortgage covered, if you will, in LA. So then, how did you go about expanding to these other properties? Because there's people out here like here your 3-year time frame, and now you have again nearly 40 doors, as we'd say, as well as some other ventures that you're doing. Was it just little by little? Was it investors? Was it all you? What did that look like if somebody was trying to follow, for example, in your shoes?
Oh, man. Yeah, no, I was way too broke to do it on my own. So I was good at it. I would talk about it. And I remember, making $1,000, $2,000 on that arbitrage unit. And my best friend, business partner, he's my COO now. But at that time, we were always scheming where I was like, what can we do to make $1,000? We're just always like rattling off ideas and we're like, we could do this, we could do that. And I remember texting him and being like, bro, you are not going to believe this. I was like, if you get an apartment and you rent it on Airbnb, you can make $1,000 to $2,000 a month. And I'm doing it, man. And I was like, I think if we got a 2-bedroom, it would make even more. And he's like, all right, well, what do you need? I was like, I need money. I don't have any. I was like, if you pay for it, I'll show you how to do this. And he was like, great, sounds good. And so we did it. He put up the cash for it. And then my other best friend, same thing. I was like, dude, you're not going to believe this. $1,000 to $2,000 a month. Pay for it. And he was like, sure, why not? And so between both of them, I was just kind of going back and forth with them like so much. And I was like, what if we all just combined forces? And they're like, all right, yeah, sounds good. So we teamed up and we had proven the model. And basically my business partner, COO now, we were like, all right, well, let's buy a house. And we're like, well, we don't have money. So we went to, we had to raise private money, and the best private money lenders out there are moms. And so we went to Clint's mom and we're like, hey, will you lend us $79,000? And she was like, sure. So she charged us an interest rate on it. And actually, we are just about to sell that property now. It's listed, and we'll probably do like 100 to 125K on it in the 3 or 4 years that we've owned it, which is awesome. But that was like, I was like, okay, I'm getting free Airbnbs. I don't have to pay for them. I just have to bring my experience and show people that I'm good at this, and they'll trust me, and I can just keep doing this over and over and over again. So we buy this condo. I'm always posting about it on social media. I'm as Rob Abasolo. Robuilt doesn't exist. This is just me to my friends, right? And I had some other friends that reached out, and they're like, hey, this Airbnb stuff's cool. Like, tell us about it. And I told them about it. They're like, oh my God, like we want to do that. And I was like, well, cool, you should. And they're like, how can we work with you? And I was like, well, I mean, I can consult you like as a friend, just text me. I'll like let you know anything you want. Or if you want, like maybe you guys could pay for it and get the loan and I could show you how to do it. But it'd be a lot cheaper to just text me. And they're like, no, I think we prefer the partnership one. And I was like, okay, sure. Free house. Why not? So we bought a house in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And that was really cool too, because like, it was my foray into the Smoky Mountains and I didn't have to pay for it, which was dope. And then I actually think I ended up paying for like half of the down payment, which was like $16K out of my pocket. Cause I don't know, I felt guilty. I was like, oh, I don't know. I was like, they're kind of taking all the risks. Maybe I should put up like, half. I didn't have to. I asked my wife, I was like, what do you think? And she's like, I mean, yeah, it seems like the ethical thing to do. And I was like, we got the money, let's do it. So we did. And then, I was taking improv in LA around that time. And we were going around in a circle on the first class and introducing ourselves. And, everyone's like, hi, my name's Michael. I'm a starving actor. And hi, I'm Michelle. I'm also a starving actor. And hey, I'm John. Yeah. A starving model. And then they were like, what about you? I'm like, I'm Rob. I work in advertising and I have a bunch of Airbnbs. And they were all like, Spur! They're like, why are you here? You're not poor. And I was like, well, I'm broke. I'm not poor. But they were just like so weirded out that this like real estate in their mind, like this rich real estate guys in this like class. And we do a show. Like, I don't know if it's like then or whenever, but we do a show and a guy comes up to me from class and he's like, hey man, that real estate stuff sounds pretty cool. Like, tell me about it. And I was like, oh, well, hey, I'm doing this. I built a tiny house in my backyard and I'm building this one in Joshua Tree, California and this and that. And they were just he was like, man, he's like, I've got some money. If I paid for it, would you teach me how to do it? And I was like, sure, I'll take a free house. And so it's kind of funny, me posting about all the stuff that I was doing. And granted, I was doing a lot. I was like really hustling, not really making anything, just, saving my money. And I was really disciplined about that, getting into Airbnb and real estate. I had always come at this as I am not going to spend any of this money. It's not mine. And I'm just going to put it back into whatever I'm doing. And so, I think just people would see that and they would see that I'm working hard. And I would talk about, hey, I'm making $1,000 to $2,000 a month, because truly I was. I didn't actually spend it, but I was making it. And they were just impressed. And it was kind of funny. Like at that time, interest rates were 2-3%. And everyone had money and everyone was willing to just they're like, please take it. Show me what to do with this. Because most people in a 9-to-5 world do not know what to do with their money. They know how to do the thing they do at their job, but investing, they're horrible at. Most people, right? So I think that was just like a wide open opportunity for me at that time.
So when did you finally realize, okay, you're at a place where you could quit your job and, say goodbye to that safety that you've had for a period of time?
It was, I think, 3 years into that journey, really because a lot of different weird, crazy things that happened. But pandemic happens. I started in 2017. 2020, I start a YouTube channel on January 7th where it was called Robuilt. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do a DIY thing and be this weird DIY kooky guy. And I didn't want to do tiny houses. I didn't want to do Airbnb because that was the most boring content on the internet. I was like, definitely not. I don't want to be that. So I was like, I'm going to do DIY. And then 6 months into that journey, a random video that I did about my tiny house. It was the third video I ever made, but I didn't have anything to DIY. And so I was like, I'll just talk about this tiny house because I kind of DIY'd that. And that went viral. And I was just so bummed because I was like, why did that go viral? Why not like the other ones where I actually cared about the process and I'm building cool DIY things? And, I was just so bummed because people were caring about what I thought didn't matter or wasn't really that cool. And my friend was like, why are you so bummed about this? And I said, well, I don't know, tiny house and Airbnb content, the creators out there just are boring. And he's like, well, what if you were the not boring version? And I was like, wow, that is genius. And so I kind of pivoted my channel to that, to tiny houses and Airbnb. And I basically, long story short, I ended up just doing consultations. I was like, I mean, why not? People will pay me for this. There's kind of a funny way that I fell into consultations. I had a buddy who reached out to me. He had a YouTube channel and he was like, hey, I see you're doing this YouTube thing. Dude, I think I could help you. We could help each other in this and that. I was like, oh my gosh, yes, of course. I was like, let's set up a Zoom. Let's chat. It's so nice to hear from you because I hadn't talked to him since high school. And he was like, great. Yeah. One thing though, I'm going to have to charge you a consultation fee. It's going to be about $150 an hour. Is that cool? And I was like, huh. Yeah, well, let me think about that. And I got off the computer. I went to my wife. I was like, can you believe that? That stuff. I was like, that's so lame. He reached out to me and snaked me into like trying to pay him money. And I was like, $150 an hour. Can you believe this guy? $150 an hour. $150 an hour. People pay that? I was like blown away. I was like, holy crap. And so I was like, all right, maybe people pay me $150 an hour. And I think at this point I had 25,000 subscribers, 20,000, I don't know, something like that. And then, I just said it in one of my videos. I made a video on how to permit a tiny house in California. And I was like, hey, by the way, I offer consultations now. So if you want to book me, like my link's down below. And what do you know? I would get like 1 a week, 2 a week, 3 a week, 2 a day, 3 a day, 4 a day. And before you knew it, I was booked out like a month in advance. And, I was making like, I don't know, I started at $150 an hour, but, I actually consulted a consultant and he was like, hey, by the way, this is gold and you're too cheap. And if you're booked 100% of the time, you're too expensive. You need to be booked 60% of your time. So I was like, all right, $250 an hour, $300 an hour, $500 an hour. People kept paying it. And I was like, okay, this is kind of crazy. So I got to this point where I'm making like, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000 a month consulting on top of my job, which was paying me $110,000. And that, by the way, I make a lot more money than that now. Not a brag, but I want to put this into perspective. The richest I've ever felt when I was making $20,000 to $30,000 a month on top of my salary. So for people that are like, man, I want to make millions or many millions, it doesn't matter. At a certain point, it really doesn't. Like when you get your 20 to 30K on top of your salary, it's like a mind-bending, crazy, like, oh my goodness, I'm rich. Because it's the first time in your life you can kind of say, oh yeah, I'm going to go out to eat with my wife and we're going to have sushi. And you're like, I made 20 grand this month. Like, who cares? Like, that's really what that was. That's like the initial like FU money, right? Because there's a limit to it, but it's kind of fun because it's house money. You're not messing with it. Like you're not really messing with your actual financial situation. Like you need your salary to actually pay your bills and sustain your life. But like anything on top of that, that's just extra, just given to you, it doesn't matter. You're like, man, I could spend, if I lost $20,000 right now, it doesn't matter. I still have my job. That's how it felt for me, right? It was a big deal. And, I had built up this business like doing that. And I remember I consulted somebody and they were like, hey, just so you know, you should start a course. And I was like, well, that's silly. Who would ever want to pay me for a course? He's like, I'll tell you right now, I just paid $2,000 for another Airbnb course, and bro, it sucks, and it's way worse than your YouTube channel, and your YouTube channel is free. And I was like, well, that's cute. Thanks. Move it along. And, he inceptioned me. And, I was like, and that's interesting. Like, would people really want to pay me for that, right? And so, whatever, I was like, I'll shoot a course and I'll do that. But I got to this point where, this is where I tell people, like, you can't quit your job until you have a side hustle, and that side hustle grows to the point where it's not possible to make more money at that side hustle until you quit your job. And that's kind of where I was, where this consulting thing was like taking off. And I was like, well, I can't make more than 30 grand because I'm spending 40 hours a week at work. And that was kind of that inflection point for me.
And how did that conversation go?
Yeah. So it was hard because I had been telling my wife I was going to quit like a lot of, for months. I was like, I'm making way more money here. Why am I still working? And she was like, great. Like, go ahead and quit. And I was like, no. I was hoping that she'd be like, no, you can't quit. Like I needed her to tell me that because it made so much sense to quit, but I was scared. Right. And, I remember it was time to quit. Hadn't launched the course at all. But I wrote it down. I had a good, better, best scenario where I'm like, all right, if I quit, here's what I think I'll make with like the 10 income streams that I've built. I was like, the worst case scenario, I think I'm going to make $500,000 a year just based on my 4 or 5 Airbnbs, my consulting. I've got I've got a course, like I'll release a course. And if the course does like $20,000 in sales, that should be pretty good. And like, it was kind of like that, right? No. I think the good, better, best was it was 200K, 300K, 500K. I'm sure I could pull it up, but that's kind of what I had mapped out. And so I was like, every single one of these are higher than my salary. so why the hell am I still working at my job? So I schedule a meeting with my bosses. I tell my wife, I'm like, it's time. She's like, yeah, duh. And so I schedule a meeting with my bosses, and it's on Zoom because it's during the pandemic. And as soon as they, like, one joins, and they're like, what's up? What's going on? And I'm like, nothing. Let's wait for Lori. And then he's like, okay. So, I'm waiting for the other boss to join because the other one's, obviously something's up. Lori joined. She's an amazing boss, best boss I ever had. And they're kind of like, what's going on? And I was like, and they're like, oh my God, is everything okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm quitting. And they're like, oh, thank God. Oh my God. Of course you're quitting. They're like, you see, you're obviously crushing it in the other stuff. Because my YouTube channel had taken off too and everything. And then I'm like, I know. And then they're like, are you gonna be okay? Like, financially? And I was like, yeah, I make way more money doing the other stuff. And they're like, then what are you worried about? Oh my God, it was so funny. I was like, I'm losing the health care. And they were just like, yeah, you'll figure that out. And I was like, it's so funny that the reason I didn't quit my job was because I was scared of paying. I didn't want to make $200,000, $300,000 or $500,000 a year because I was scared of paying $2,000 a month out of pocket for healthcare.
Isn't it crazy? It's like a lot of people today, you hear that thing sometimes too, well, if I make a lot more, then the government's going to take a lot more taxes. I'm like, there is that angle, but there's also the other part about you making a lot more money. So, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of people that are stuck too with their pensions, that they don't even do that calculation of what the pension will be, what will be without it, and what they can actually make happen. And they get locked in, and then they turn around and at 66 and say, damn it, why didn't I do this earlier?
Oh, bro. Well, I remember writing my goodbye email to my team. Like, it was my final day at work because I put in my 2 weeks notice. And I was like, part of you guys may have seen this coming, and part of me wonders, should I have waited one extra month for my equity and for my options to vest 100%? And I was like, that's a problem for future Robert. I'd realized that as I was typing out this email. I was like, I didn't vest my options. I just needed to wait 1 month, It's like for my company match to set. I just could not believe it. But, it's crazy, man. The plan kind of exploded after that. And my best case scenario, I just smashed through that super quickly in the first year.
That's amazing. I just as you mentioned that, the things that people think about, I was like, what about this? Alex Hormozy just dropped this one video that's talking about all his expensive mistakes he made. And I love watching it because you're like, oh yeah, but it's usually that one expensive mistake that then led to, 10Xing, his earnings somewhere else. So it's like, while we need to keep some of those things in mind, it's still one of those things that as long as you're continuing to grow and progress, it matters less in the long run.
Oh yeah. I always say that every mistake makes me a million. So
right. No, exactly.
That's like a future million.
Yeah. So I'm curious now, basically to me, because the way you just laid it out, when I hear that story about, how you, in essence, house hacked your way to these other things. Now, granted, you also focused in on some skills that you got really good at that you were then able to, trade for money, trade for, in essence, it becomes your version of the sweat equity into a project. Would you change anything if you went back? Like if there was somebody today saying that, oh, gosh, that's amazing. How do I do this? Would you change anything from what you did? Because it sounds very replicable.
No, I wouldn't. I mean, yeah, it depends on how philosophical or are we following Back to the Future rules where if I actually did change everything, then everything changes. I don't know. That is kind of the, I don't know. I think people always expect a grandiose answer.
Yeah,
right?
That is dangerous.
Yes, I pinpointed this. No.
No. My wife will lose it. She won't be able to follow the podcast if we go back to the future rules. So instead, just purely, no, it drives her nuts. Daylight savings drives her nuts too. But just looking at purely that approach that you took of how you have, sure, I say slowly but surely, even though it's actually been at a decent clip, but would you tell anybody else if you're coaching them on how to approach building out their own wealth? Would you still say, no, actually, I think the pathway that I followed is a really good pathway for others?
I don't really, these days, as someone in the Airbnb space, as a coach, as an educator that kind of sees all the scammy dudes out there, I don't really buy into this, hey, get an Airbnb, replace your 9 to 5 income. Like, I think it's possible. And if someone really wants that, no problem. Like, obviously I'm going to help. But I just see these guys that are like, yeah, do you want to live passively on the beach and make $10,000 a month? Well, there's this thing called arbitrage. Here's how I hate it. Like, I'm like, don't go into this expecting to quit your job from the income. Like, I tell people, you got to figure out how to make money outside of real estate and outside of your job before you quit. Like, you're not going to quit. You're not going to become so wealthy in real estate that you can leave a 6-figure job. Like, reverse engineer that. For you to make $10,000 a month is $120,000 a year. If you made a 10% return and you wanted to make that much money, you'd have to invest $1.2 million of your own money into property. And if you made a 10% return, you could then make $120,000 a year. Like, that's really hard. Where are you going to get the $1.2 million from, right? Don't expect it from real estate. I think this is the unrealistic thing. Now, the wealth, very different, right? Like, there's a lot of different components to real estate that people don't really realize. There's the cash flow, and that's what 90% of people focus on. But then there's these 3 really beautiful aspects that, like, are way better. There's appreciation, there's debt pay down, and there's tax benefits. And when you marry those 3 things with cash flow, well, yeah, dude, it's like a killer thing, but everyone's so focused on the cash flow. And I'm like, go into real estate for the other 3 benefits. Let people pay down your mortgage. If you have a $1 million house, 30 years from now, that house is going to be worth double. It's going to be a balance of $0 because other people paid for it. Guess what? Now you have $2 million that you can sell the house for. That's wealth. Making $500 in cash flow, that's not wealth. Cash makes you rich. Equity makes you wealthy. And too many people are like trying to reverse engineer. How do I become a full-time real estate investor? I'm like, don't do it. That's a really hard job. You cannot do that. Very few people have done it. I barely did it, right? Like, I was making a lot of money from Airbnb. I still do, but same thing. Like, all my Airbnb account balances have like 10,000, 15, 20, 30,000 for all the different houses. I don't spend it. I have never gone into real estate saying like, oh, the 20,000 I make from this property, I'm going to spend it. I know I reinvested into real estate. That's what you should do with cash flow. You should figure out how to make money outside of real estate. And that's how you should really focus on like leaving the job, not real estate, because real estate is a way harder job and a way harder job to make a lot of money at. So you may as well focus on equity, building wealth concurrently with another side hustle. That's what I tell people these days. And I feel pretty good about that. I feel pretty ethical about telling people not to expect to quit your 9 to 5 with real estate.
What would you say the current climate is, in your opinion, with the higher interest rate?
I love it. It's great. I think anyone who is scared to, it doesn't matter, man. It's all psychological. Like, let's talk about 2020, 2021. Interest rates were 2.5%, 3.5%. What was the excuse? Oh, it's so competitive. Everyone's offering $50,000 over. It's too saturated. Okay, great. Interest rates are high. Now it's not competitive. Oh, interest rates are high. I can't get in now. Who cares? Figure out a deal that works. Like, it's not that hard. People who feel that way just don't deserve or shouldn't get into real estate. Stop being scared. Do it or don't. Find a deal that works. It doesn't matter if the deal is a 20% interest rate or it's a 0% interest rate. If it cash flows, you should pursue it. That's kind of like my tough love, like, harsh reality answer. The more delicate answer is there's a lot of ways to make money, dude. Like, I think the whole Airbnb bust thing, it's a big myth. Like, I thought for a second maybe there was a merit to it, but no, people are just really bad at comping. I've really dialed in how I comp, how I analyze properties. I feel unbeatable in the world of Airbnb. My properties are making money. Like my Scottsdale property, the one that I said made $44,000 this March. What do you think it made last March? Michael, you might know if you follow along. But what do you think that I'll ask Arton. What do you think that property made last year?
I would
last March of 2023.
28.
Okay, $14,000. Okay, my expenses on that property are $20,000. I lost $6,000 last March, and so for a second there, I was like, holy shit, did I mess up? Like, did I miss the mark on this? And I was like, maybe this Airbnb bust, like maybe it's true. And then I started like dialing my comps. I started really dialing my competition. And I realized, holy crap, I have this amazing house, but no amenities. I invested $22,000 into that house and built out 3 pickleball courts. And 1 year later, I'm making $44,000. I literally increased the profits of that property 30 grand. This February, like a month ago, I did 40,000. Last February, I did 13,000. November, I did 39,000. The November before that, I did 11. So it's not an anomaly. It's not just like I didn't get lucky. I just figured out you have to know what you're doing to make a lot of money in Airbnb.
I mean, it's so smart too. You're riding the pickleball
Oh yeah,
bubble, and then
big time.
So
I love it. I'm putting them all in my properties now. But the point is, like, yeah, interest rates are high, but you just got to figure out how to overcome them, right? How do you overcome high interest rates? Make more money. How do you make more money? Destroy your competition. Like, have a amenity that have great design. So that's kind of like one way. It's like, yeah, high interest rates, but make more money. And I think that's like the most no duh thing. A lot of people are like, well, duh. But I'm like, no, but you're not doing it. Like, you're not figuring it out. Like when people are like, oh, how do I quit my job? Like, I've got this side hustle, but what do I do? I'm like, figure out how to make more money. It's like, it's not that hard. You just got to like sell your time until you can scale that out, until you can scale yourself out of your business. And I think with Airbnb, it's like, yeah, interest rates suck, but man, I'm all in on creative finance these days. My program, Creative Camp, is a program that teaches people how to get into creative finance properties, meaning instead of going to a bank, we're dealing directly with the seller. We are either taking over payments for the houses that a seller might have and inheriting their 2, 3, 4, 5% interest rate home. We're doing seller finance. The property down the road from me, I just bought 3% interest from the owner for 30 years. No banks. They didn't have to show tax returns. They didn't have to do anything like that. So yeah, you can gripe about the interest rates, or you can figure out creative solutions. You can either invest in amenities, or you can go down the creative finance route where your interest rates are 2, 3, 4%. And that's what I'm doing every single day. So I don't know. High interest rates are just kind of like an excuse. I don't mean to come at you. It's just,
yeah, I know. I feel the same. I feel like actually when interest rates high, it's actually better opportunity because you have less people actually in the market. I'm very curious. Have you ever considered creating a fund?
Yeah. We have it. We have the docs drawn up for it. It's called Robuilt Capital. I get lots of money tossed my way every week. Like people are like, hey, I've got money. We probably have $18 to $20 million in investor interest at the moment. But to be honest, like I think there is way too many problems in my personal portfolio for me to go out and raise money. And so I've been spending the last 6 months fixing everything in my portfolio. I've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, getting it all up to kind of like, good condition. And I think once I get my portfolio to this like amazing spot, which I'm getting close, then I can say, hey, here are the results from improving my properties. Here's the success story. Let's go do this like, at a larger scale. So yes, eventually. But for now, we got to focus on mine first before I go and, sell investors on it, right?
That's fair. What does drive you, Rob? This is the deep question.
Yeah, wow, okay, curveball. Well, I don't know.
Is there some big goal, like, you want to be the first person to build short-term rentals on Mars along Elon Musk? Like, what is it that gets you out of bed and keeps you going each day?
I think as I get into this like education space, I'm a big fan of like at scale, I can't really ever do what I want at scale, right? Like I have really unique and, very creative Airbnbs, and it's hard for me to do that over and over and over again. And I kind of found that like having a community, we've got 2,800 students. They launch the most creative, unique properties in the world, and far better than I'll ever be able to do, and at a scale that I won't be able to do, right? So I get a lot of joy out of helping others do that. I actually, contrary to all the rant I just gave, I do like people being able to quit their job and do that kind of stuff. I'm just not leading that, right? Like I'm not leading with like, hey, if you do this, you're going to quit. It's like, hey, if you do this, it'll help you quit, but you still got to put in the work. And I like making money from that. Like I do. Like it's an amazing livelihood to say, hey, the way I get paid is I help people change their lives. I think that's a really cool thing, which is always confusing to me, like why anyone ever shits on education or courses, because I'm like, dude, like I know it seems that selling a course is slimy or something, but like if you actually talk to, the Michael Merrills of the world or any of the other 2,800 students, and you hear about the things that they're able to accomplish at a faster pace, it's just nuts to me. I'm like, dude, these guys are like conquering the world. And granted, they could have done it without paying for the education, of course, but I mean, there's a huge difference between conversing with someone. It doesn't have to be my course, but someone who has actually taken education seriously and invested in themselves. There's a big difference between that person and the person DIYing it. And it's not a good, it doesn't mean that the DIYer isn't doing great. There's just a much different conversation that's happening.
Yeah, 100%. I think what's great for me, like when it came to your content, is there was this accessibility. There was this sense of, okay, it wasn't scammy, for me. But then also once I get into your like community in that group, like it's so different when I jump in and, I spend some times in some other groups. They're mean, man. Whereas this group that you created in this community, like it's just everybody has each other's backs. And I think that's another key thing that's beneficial a lot to some of these programs is finding that right community where like, gosh, the advice that you have and, where the students become teachers, like there's so many people within Host Camp that have stepped into this role. And now you start seeing these people pop up with these different level of expertise, whether they're jumping in around copy, whether they're jumping into photography, whether they're, a resource because somebody wants a mural on their wall. And it's like, this person does great murals. It's so amazing to see how that's shaped. And then this is also crazy though. And this is the part that makes me nervous about the community is, my goodness, man, everybody keeps putting out such amazing properties. And I think that is huge. And I think, again, goes down to your philosophy of how you even approached that and how you tried to, what you've instilled in individuals about how they set this up, but also that ownership around the hospitality side of it. Because I think the reason why there's an Airbnb bust is that so many people get into rentals. They don't want to treat it like this hospitality business, short-term rentals. They treat it as hospitality. And because it's not just a passive thing. You've got to be involved in it. But at the same time, you've got to invest and keep these properties, looking top notch. The ones who are losing the money are all the ones who, unfortunately, are not competing in that level of category because they're all falling off because nobody wants to stay at the air mattress anymore in somebody's living room.
Definitely. Well, they're living in the times where when Airbnb came out, like if you just watch TikTok comments and Instagram, they're always like, oh, Airbnb, like you used to supposed to be cheap and blah. And it's like, well, yeah, those people exist and they're losing a lot of money right now. And there's no reason for them to stay in business because you're not booking it. You're booking my place. So what are you complaining about, right?
I mean, as a customer, I don't know short-term rentals, but I rent on Airbnb all the time. If that first picture doesn't speak to me of a place that I admire to stay at, I'm out. It's just scroll back. So yeah, for sure. I'm not looking for the mattress. I'm looking for the house that I would like to own, but I can't.
So I to answer your question, I think it's a double-sided, right? So obviously, yes, I want to be fulfilled and I want to actually influence people. And that's what I do as a content creator. I want to make more money. I think we all do. But honestly, as I mentioned, I do well. And I have never felt the way I felt when I was making that extra 20 to 30 grand. And I think I'm just trying to get to that point. When I get back to that, and that doesn't mean making more money. It just means getting to this point where the more money you make, the more stressed you become, the more hires you have to make. It's like a big thing. And so it's like, yeah, making a lot of money is great, but if you're getting crushed by the stress, is it worth it? And sometimes I'm like, man, I kind of miss the days where I was making $20,000 more a month because that was true, right? But that was the true wealth for me at that point. So I don't know what my big goal is, but I think I do want to just get to this point where I have this kind of self-sustaining community and company doing that, and my Airbnbs are all up to, kind of thing. And I can just really just check in on it and have COOs that run that for me. And I'm just kind of I don't really want to be super rich. I think, my good friend, Tony Robinson, he wants to be a billionaire. We always joke about it. I'm like, why on earth would you want that? That's awful, man. He's like, I don't know. He's like, just think about the impact I can have. And I was like, well, I think I'm okay with having a real estate portfolio that's worth 50 million. I think I'm good with that. I don't need much more than that. So, and that's a lot, right? So I don't have a number. I don't have a goal, but it's not being a billionaire. It's not being 100 millionaire. It's nothing like that. I think it's just being able to be done at 5 p.m. and hanging out with my family. But right now I kind of feel like I can't do that. I'm really, really busy. So once I get there, I think that's when I'll have made it. And I think I got some work to do.
That's a great point, because even though people hear and you say, you're doing well now, but it's that thing where it's like you're still you're creating the assurance that that still exists. You're making sure that you can have that in the future. It's not like, I mean, sure, if you decided to sell it all now and move to a low cost country somewhere, you might be able to stretch things out and be
Yeah, for sure. I've thought about it for sure.
yeah. How can people find you if they and if you maybe actually could describe a little bit too of just your 3 programs before we wrap up here?
Yeah, well, you can always find me on YouTube at Robuilt, Robuilt. A lot of people think it's Robuilt, so I'm proud of you for saying it correctly. Though it's kind of you kind of have to say you're required to, or you're excommunicado.
Exactly. I don't want that.
And you can also find me on Instagram at Robuilt. You can listen to me several times a week on the Bigger Pockets Real Estate Podcast. We are the largest real estate podcast in the world. Really great community there. And if you want to learn about Host Camp, that's kind of like my main program where we teach people how to run Airbnbs and start those businesses. We've also got Creative Camp where we teach people how to acquire them creatively. We got all that information everywhere. I don't want to pitch too much, but head on over to hostcamp.com. By the time this is out, I actually think the new hostcamp.com will be live, which will be all free content and education for people that want to learn this the free way. And then, hey, if you ever want to join the other stuff, feel free. But the free stuff's always the best stuff. That's what I always say.
Amazing. Love it. Thank you, Rob, both on for joining us today, but also for everything you taught me with my own horse property. I still appreciate that.
It was great having you, Rob. I personally learned a lot just by listening to you today, so I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, fellas. Next time, I promise I'll let y'all talk too.
He's going to be great.
Guest.
Yeah, it's great. No. That's why I kind of held back, because I want to hear from you and not from me.
Thanks, Rob.